The next bill that we're going to hear is by Representative Lombardi. It directs school superintendents to respond to discipline data, unequal impact based on race, ethnicity, and or disability. Welcome, one of our favorite representatives, Representative Lombardi.
Thank you, Mr.
The great city of Providence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of this auspicious commission. First of all, I want to commend you on your lesson on 101 legislation. I think it's important that we do that, let people know how this process works. It's many times people get confused. I want to commend you that, Mr. Chair, that you always do that, and I think that's very important. This is a reintroduction of legislation that was proposed the past 2 years by Representative Diaz to reduce the number of suspensions in Rhode Island schools and address the significant disparity among the suspension rates of white versus minority students. I'm sorry, I have to read some stuff because a lot of it comes from charts, and I know you instructed us not to. So
that's quite all right for someone of your stature.
I'll take the demerits, Mr. Chair, and it's not the first time that I've been demerited. So. Nationwide experts increasingly agree that out-of-school suspensions carry serious unintended consequences and little corrective benefit. The use of suspensions is opposed by the Centers for Disease Control, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, an American Psychological Association, the National School Boards Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. As you can see, I think several agencies and organizations that certainly are on the forefront with our children care about this, and I think it's very important that we take our lead from them. Students who are suspended from school are up to 10 times as likely as other students to drop out of school or repeat a grade. Paradoxically, suspensions are associated with higher rates of misbehavior after suspension. Oh, so that's what my problem was, Mr. Chairman. I just figured it out. And lower academic achievement. Perhaps most troubling, though, suspended students are significantly more likely to become involved in the juvenile justice system. And, you know, by the time they come and see people like me and some of the other attorneys, oftentimes it's too late because now they have a mock. And you know, you've been in, and it's really something that stays with you the rest of your life. You're identified by that particular mock, whatever that mock may be. And this is known as the school-to-prison pipeline, which is a scary thought when you analyze that. Students who misbehave even mildly are suspended. They get into trouble, as many kids do, who are left unsupervised in the middle of the day and get sent to the training school. There they learn a new set of skills from harder youth, which often results in further involvement in the juvenile justice system and later on an adult record. And as we know, oftentimes if the offense is significant enough, you could be tried as an adult. So imagine being in an adult system, you're 15, 16 years old, and you're with, hardcore criminal murderers, rapists, armed robbers, whatever. In January of 2014, the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice issued joint guidance discouraging the use of suspensions for nonviolent student behavior. Yet in Rhode Island, students are predominantly suspended from school for exactly those offenses, which more than 60% of the suspensions being served for low-risk behavioral infractions that can be controlled by other means. And it's imperative that we look to alternative means. While over-suspensions affect all Rhode Island students, they particularly impact those students already at a disadvantage, meaning minority youth, low-income youth, LGBT youth, who are often suspended because they fight back when they are bullied, and disabled youth. Just imagine, these issues with disabled youth and some of these other groups that we talked about. There are some circumstances where suspension is necessary, and I think we can all agree on that. This legislation still allows for youth who pose a physical risk or serious disruption to students to be suspended, but the legislation does not allow students to be suspended and face a lifetime of consequences because they talked back to a teacher on a bad day, because they were tired of being bullied, or because they behaved in a frustrating way children often can. This legislation will keep kids in school, keep them off the streets, and keep the state of Rhode Island from having to pay to educate them later at the training school and ACI, and in some instances maybe pay the ultimate debt, which is losing your life. So, Mr. Chairman, I think you're going to have several speakers. Even some of the people who were opposed to this, I believe, are on board with regard to they will be offering some amendments. I think it's a good bill, and I think it's something that we really need to consider, especially, our city in Providence, anyway, is a minority city, and there are over 40 languages spoken in the school, and we need to make sure that a child is not suspended because maybe there was a language barrier, maybe there was a cultural barrier, but we need to create these alternatives. And I think you're going to hear from certainly the most enlightened, probably the students themselves. You need to hear from them, and I think you're going to be quite impressed with what they have to say. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. If there's any questions, I will endeavor to answer if I'm able to.
Thank you, Representative Lombardi. Are there any questions for Representative Lombardi? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee.
There is no one signed up against or con with this bill. Everyone has put down a P, which is for pro. So that means everyone that has signed up is in support of the bill. The first three individuals, and Representative Lombardi, this is an area where we have been successful with. It was approximately 4 years ago, Representative Diaz sponsored legislation affecting suspension for students that were truant. Passing that bill decreased the suspension rate in the state of Rhode Island by, I believe, 30%. So it really can make a difference. So we've had some success.
Mr. Chairman, this is another arrow in our quiver to take a proactive stance like this legislature always does. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So the first three witnesses, is it Arizula Pina?
Aurelina Peña.
Okay. And here we have expert Representative Diaz.
Grace Sen, and Kendall Hall.
Okay. And let's see. Grace, why don't we start with you? Welcome. Welcome. Please proceed. The button has to be up, Grace.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Grace, and I am a member of Young Voices. I am in the 11th grade at Classical High School. Today, I am here to speak about the importance of enforcing our current laws around suspension. Currently, our law requires that a student only be suspended when he or she is posing safety threats to the other student's safety, or one who exhibits persistent conduct which substantially impedes the ability of other students to learn. However, I know from my experience that this law is not being strictly followed. Oftentimes, students are suspended for nonviolent misbehaviors or even for simply being late to school. When I was in middle school, I saw one of my classmates being suspended by the school's principal. He was suspended for disrupting the class. True, he was misbehaving in class and initiating side conversations. However, he was nowhere close to exhibiting actual or implied physical harm. Despite of this, he was called to the principal's office and was suspended for the rest of the day. We all felt very sorry for him and did not understand the school's rationale behind it, but there was nothing we could do. Such irrational usage of suspension is not uncommon. Currently in my high school, students can be suspended for a day if they're awfully tardy. Apart from breaking the law, the school's actions are incomprehensible. By forcing students out of school, the school is doing the exact opposite of what it was originally meant to do. Suspended students are deprived of their rights to learn and may even develop resentments towards schools or their education. This will encourage these students to exhibit even more misbehaviors and thus push them into an endless loophole of misconduct with no way out. Ironically, the school's attempt at helping its students instead forced the students to misbehave even more. Because of this, the suspension bill should be more strictly enforced so that schools may not suspend students for trivial matters. By improving the school's policies, students are better guaranteed an education that will help them in life. One way to achieve this is to implement methods so that school suspensions will be better recorded and be open to the public. Thank you for letting me speak today.
You're very welcome. Grace, do you speak Mandarin or?
I speak Mandarin, yes.
Shishi. Thank you.
谢谢。
And if we could have our counsel, Grace, you mentioned students being suspended for coming in late. We passed the legislation that bans suspension for truancy. Could we check and make sure that lateness or tardiness was included? And if it, could we do that, please?
Thank you.
And if it's not, I think Representative Diaz is going to have to amend her bill. We're going to take care of that.
Thank you
Grace.
very much.
Very good. Shishi, thank you.
谢谢。
Arlene Pina. Arelina, por favor, please.
So good afternoon. My name is Orlina Pena. I'm a member of Young Voices and an 11th grader at Juanita Sanchez. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk before you today. I'm here to talk about the importance of enforcing the current law around suspension. Currently, our law requires that suspension only be used when a student is a threat to other students' safety and when substantially impedes the ability to learn. I can tell you from my experience that this law is not being followed because in my school, if you walk out of class without a pass, you immediately get suspended. Schools are punishing time out of class with more time out of class. As you can see, the fact is schools are not following the law and are finding loopholes around it. By adding the requirement that every district review the discipline data and take action to address discipline disparities by race or ethnicity, we can document this problem and make sure students and parents are aware of the fact that this way they can defend their rights. I know my rights because of Young Voices, but the truth is not all youth do. We need to make sure that students are aware of their rights and can be able to get their education.
Very good. Buen trabajo. Very good. Good job. Muchas gracias. Are there any questions for this witness? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And we have Kendall. Please proceed, Kendall. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Kendall Hall, and I'm a board member of Young Voices and also an 11th grader at Juanita Sanchez. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm here to speak about the importance of enforcing our current laws around suspension. As of right now, Rhode Island laws state that suspension should only take place when a student interrupts the classroom to an intolerable level or is a threat to student safety. On an everyday basis, this law is misinterpreted, and students are suspended for trivial matters. Sometimes they're suspended for disobeying the teacher once or twice or simply disagreeing with the teachers. When schools do this, students begin to act out even more. When kids see that their punishment does not correlate with their offense, kids become angry, knowing that kids who do egregious acts are held to the same punishment. It is simply unfair. The fact is, schools are not following the law and are finding loopholes around it. In order to prevent this, we should add the requirement that every district reviews their discipline data and takes action to address disparities by race or ethnicity. We can document this problem and make sure that parents and students are aware of this so they can defend their rights. I know my rights because of Young Voices, but not all youth do. We need to make sure that students are fairly judged because everyone deserves an education and a right to be inside the school building. Thank you.
Very good. Are there any questions? Representative Lanza and then Representative Lanza.
I really want to thank all of you for coming this afternoon. Your involvement and the information you can provide is so important. I do want to say that I am in a unique position to listen to what you're saying. Last year, I taught as an emergency sub in Providence every day from October 1st to June 20th. In fact, spent my last month and a half at the JOTC unit at Hope High School. I taught everything from pre-K, again, to JOTC, day-to-day sub. I was at 10 high schools, 8 elementary schools, and 7 middle schools. And I think I saw it all. And while I agree with you about the suspensions, one thing that you said, actually this is information on my part, why are they suspending in violation of the law? I'd be curious your take on that, what your thoughts about that are. Also, I have seen instances, because I was in the classroom, where I saw stressed out teachers. I saw teachers working really hard, and despite that, it did not go well, never mind as a sub. And we talk about alternatives. I would be curious, suggestions you might have for alternatives, because I even go into those rooms and covered those rooms where they sent the students who are not having a good day and trying to deal with that as well and work and so forth. So, I mean, this is an important bill, and it's important, but there's other factors at play, and maybe not necessarily right now, but I'd love to get your input about those issues as well, because I think there's additional factors that to help those students even that we need to find a way. So, thank you.
Well, I think that instead of actually suspending kids and kicking them out of the school building, because a lot of kids, when they act up, they actually want to get out of the school building. So when you're removing them, you're doing what they want. So again, they're going to act up because they don't want to be in school. So instead of just suspending them, we should keep them inside of school. Maybe restore what they did using restorative practices, where if a kid destroys the cafeteria, make him clean the cafeteria, make him redo so he doesn't do it again. So instead of just being angry at the school and getting madder and madder, and just so that he just takes out on the school, he actually learns what he did wrong and won't do it again. That's what I think.
Thank you. Representative Diaz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to congratulate you for being the voice for issues that is affecting you and affecting you, other friends in the school. But I'm very surprised because Chairman McNamara and I, we passed legislation a couple of years ago addressing exactly what you is saying here today. Exactly, that we trying in the past to avoid the schools and the kids to home, because that is why they're looking most of the time, get into trouble, have a time, be out and acting up, and so many other things. So to trying to avoid that, we put a legislation, and you really surprised me today to saying that the issue is not resolved. So it's a thank you to you for coming here and let us know that the legislation is not enforced, and we need to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Diaz. Representative McLaughlin, you have a question?
First of all, I'd like to thank you young ladies for coming up to testify in reference to, suspension. But the question I'd like to ask you, and I think you reiterated on it, young lady, was what are your alternatives? When I say this, I just want to give you an example. My daughter, her first day of teaching school at Durfee, all right, a young man used profane language on her, took a chair and literally threw it across the room, hit another student, okay, and when she tried to intervene, okay, he took a shot at her. Well, luckily, my daughter is a black belt, and she put him in. She came home and she actually wept. She said to me, I'm going to get sued. So there's two sides of the story. You're there to learn, okay? You're not to be abused. You're there to learn, mutual respect. But give me your input.
For alternatives, any alternatives to suspension? I think that's the question. Do you have any alternatives? And I think you mentioned it in cleaning up the cafeteria, restorative justice, that an in-house suspension maybe?
Yeah.
In-house suspension would be a couple. So that would be two, Representative McLaughlin, that they would have in-house suspension, and that's something that they would consider. Are there any further questions? Yes, Representative Fogarty.
I just, from your testimony, and you girls did a great job, you young ladies, I should say, did an excellent job. When you say that the teachers give the suspensions out for being tardy, does this go through the vice principal? Isn't the vice principal in charge of discipline, or would any of these students move through that step, or is it just done on the spot? It doesn't seem like a vice principal is involved.
I believe it is, because each year at the beginning of the year, each grade has assembly. So during this assembly, our principal will tell us, oh, don't be tardy. If you're tardy, say more than 20 times, then you will be suspended for a day. Or if you're tardy for more than, say, like 3 times, then you have detention, like things of that nature. So I believe that, yes, principals and vice principals are involved in this process.
So it's not like on an individual case by case that you go to the principal's office once these are handed out. That doesn't happen at all?
No. In my school, it's even more strict because it's not even like 3 times you're late. It's before it was so bad that if you were late once, you get detention. If you didn't go to detention that day, you were suspended. It was just like that. So it's not like an individual thing. It's the whole
with the state, the suspension law, there's due process, and there's administrator. The school administrator would be the one that would notify the parent and conduct the suspension hearing. It's a whole process. So it would be the administrator, an administrator.
Done so automatically.
So no, it has to be done through an administrator. It has to be reported. Representative Amore.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, ladies. Excellent. I can tell they're proficient, Chairman, even without a standardized test. So one of the things that I teach at East Providence High School. So one of the things that we've done is we've established social suspensions. So you don't get to do the extra stuff. It might be a dance, might be an activity, might be something, we have pep rallies, things like that. And that has reduced in class suspension. So that's another option that might be presented. Thank you, Chairman.
Yep. Are there any further questions? Thank you very much, ladies. Good job. The next 3 witnesses will be Bethina Jimenez,
Betania Jimenez,
Jim Vincent. Mr. Jim Vincent is here today. My friend, head of the NAACP in Rhode Island. He's worked very hard the last few months. Thank you, Mr. Vincent. And Martha Yaga. Welcome. Mr. Vincent?
Yes.
You can be the lead-off hitter with this group. Welcome.
I'll defer.
Defer. Very good. Please proceed. Betania. The button should be up.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Bethania Jimenez, and I'm a member of Young Voices. I'm in the 10th grade at Alvarez High School. I would like to talk about the importance of enforcing our current laws around suspension. Currently, our law states that a student can only be suspended if they are a threat to student safety or they are a constant or they exhibit consistent conduct which substantially impedes the ability to learn. I can tell you from experience that this law is not being followed. In my school, I've personally known people who have been suspended for reasons other than violent behavior, threats, or disrupting constantly the class. Examples include using cell phones, coming late to class, or disrespecting the teachers or swearing. I understand that what those students were doing was wrong, but there are other ways to discipline those students, like detention or extra work. Now these students missed important learning time and have a suspension on their record. They have been highly affected by unfair suspension. The fact is, schools are not following the law and are finding loopholes around it. By adding the requirement that every district reviews their discipline data and takes action to address disparities in race and ethnicity, we can make sure that students and parents know their rights and can defend them. I know my rights because of Young Voices, but not all youth do. We need to make sure that students and parents that students can have the right to education and to be in school. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Are there any questions for this? Representative McLaughlin, a question. A question? Oh, you want to ask me? Okay, yep. How can I help you? The microphone?
Presently in Cumberland, we have a code of conduct. Okay?
Right.
Every high school and elementary school has a code of conduct. Okay, these articles included. Have you looked?
The discipline code within the school.
Yes. Are you people familiar with this?
I'm sure they also have discipline codes, school rules, and that. But a suspension is specifically limited to, if you look at the bill, specific offenses that threaten the health and safety of the students, as they have mentioned. So it's very specific and legally prescribed. So what the students are saying, there are many cases where it hasn't reached the level of that severity.
Gotcha.
And that is their point, is that some administrators in schools seem not to be following the law, and they want data that will verify that.
Chairman, as far as in reference to that, we have state statute, which is
Right.
law, which state statute actually supersedes
School rules.
School statute, but this has been incorporated into our school system in reference to a code of conduct, at least in Cumberland.
Right. Okay. That's good. Hopefully Cumberland doesn't have these types of issues that the kids, the students have been expressing, hopefully. Please proceed. Next witness, Martha Yeager. Please proceed. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Martha Yeager. I'm here representing the American Friends Service Committee Southeast New England program in support of this bill, which requires schools at a very minimum to track the patterns of disciplinary actions on their students. The second paragraph of the bill speaks of a student's right to attend school which is free and safe and secure, conducive to learning, and free from threat. The next sentence continues in a way that focuses on the disruptive students. I would like to suggest that it should continue to say that the child is free from capricious, abusive, and disciplinary practices as well. I think that's a two-way street, as we've been hearing from the students. I would like to give you my written testimony and ad-lib a little bit about the restorative, about what do we do about it.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of work being done on restorative justice practices, and they're particularly useful in school settings because they're teaching tools. That's what the school should be doing. What's wrong? What harm has been done? What needs to be done to fix that harm? Whether it's a monetary fixing, replacement of a chair, or whether it's someone was verbally abused and hurt, and what's going to make that person whole again? Is it an apology? Is it learning about biases? There are lots of different, there's amazing programs, some of them ranging from peer mediation to restorative justice practices that are out there. They're best practices, and we should be doing everything as a state to bring those into our school system.
Are there any questions for this witness? Yeah, absolutely. And that peer mediation, when I was teaching at Shea High School, we had a huge peer mediation program, very, very effective. And it was funded in part by Safe and Drug-Free Schools Title IX, which unfortunately has been eliminated.
I've been part of establishing one in schools in Worcester, in some of the more troubled schools in Worcester, and it's been working very, very well. We knew it was working the day that there was a kerfluffle in the cafeteria, and the teacher came running into where the peer mediators were doing a practice session and asked for their help instead of going to the principal's office.
Yeah, very effective. Are there any questions? Yeah, Representative Grace Diaz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to thank you, Martha. It's so great to see you join another youth fight. And we have a long history of working together for the racial profiling, and I'm so pleased to see you again doing what you like to do. Thank you.
Well, part of what's in my testimony is there's a lot of really interesting studies on under sort of subconscious biases that we carry and how those are impacting both the police and teachers in the way they interact with students. And we've just got to, part of what we have to do is set rules that it require good behavior so that the philosophy and the ideals catch up. But the rules sometimes come first.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Jim Vincent, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm going to be brief. The NAACP Providence branch supports this bill, and there's a couple of things I want to say. One, from a macro level, we need to have every kid that can do well in school. They have to learn in school. They cannot learn out of school. We're in a crisis. A couple of years ago, I used to say that Latino achievement was last in the country, and Commissioner Giss said, "Jim, you can't say that it's last in the country. You're wrong. It's 49th in the country. It's next to last." And I said, "Well, I appreciate you correcting me." Also, I used to say that 75% of the kids that go to CCRI need remedial work. Well, the governor just recently corrected that. It's 66% of Rhode Islanders need remedial work at CCRI. So we need every kid that can learn, that can achieve, to be in school. So there's a selfish reason that I'm here to say that, because businesses will not relocate to our state unless there's a trained, educated, and motivated labor force. I don't care if the tax rate is 0. They won't come in. They'll go to Connecticut, they'll go to Massachusetts. So we have a compelling reason to have all kids stay in school and not be suspended unless it's really, really necessary. The other reason why I'm here is that I read a recent ACLU Rhode Island report that said that there was tremendous disparities in suspensions, where students of color, especially African Americans, are suspended 3, 4, 5, 6 times more than white students for the same infractions. Well, that's morally wrong. Also, it's not economically sustainable for any kid, because if you end up in the training school, you're going to be paying $100,000, $110,000 per kid. There's no Rhode Islander that can afford to pay $100,000, $110,000 per kid, and then he graduates from that and he goes to the ACI, which is $50,000 per inmate, which I think is second highest in the country. I think Maine's the highest. We as a state cannot sustain that. It's morally wrong to discriminate against kids, but it's also economically unsustainable for our state in that we cannot attract business and we can't afford the social costs of incarceration. So for those reasons, I am strongly in favor of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. And the aspect of workforce development is definitely part of our focus. But I'm reminded by my good friend and former colleague's comment, Representative Melvoy Benson. She would often say that it is easier to build a boy than rebuild a man. And those statistics that you mentioned certainly bear that out. Are there any questions for Mr. Vincent? Yes. Representative Maldonado.
I just wanted to add that, first off, the bill is a great bill, just coming from the city of Central Falls. One of the concerns that I would just want to share with you all is that the issue with suspension is when a student is suspended, they're sent home, or their parents most of the time are not home, and there's no sort of supervision there. So then you have the issue of students out in the city with nothing much to do but sort of create disruption and such. So I just want to piggyback and say that it is important for the student to be in the building where they are learning and getting all those skills, as opposed to just being out in the community where they have no sort of supervision. So just sort of piggybacking off that and adding that in.
Thank you.
Any further questions for these witnesses? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Stephanie Geller, Rhode Island Kids Count, Randall Rose, and Hillary Davis, ACLU. And why don't we, Stephanie, please proceed and welcome.
Thank you. I think it's up. Again, hi, I'm Stephanie Geller from Rhode Island Kids Count, and we're here to support the bill and pleased to have supported it in prior years as well as this year. I wanted to just really quickly talk about the 2 provisions and the reasons we support it, which have been gone over a little bit before, but add our own data points and some other background information. The 2 important provisions and the reasons we're supporting it is that it addresses disparities in school discipline, and it also limits out-of-school suspensions. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about both of those. First of all, in terms of addressing disparities in school discipline, there's been a lot of discussion from others here on speaking about national data showing that low-income, minority, and special needs students are overrepresented in terms of school suspensions. I just wanted to present the data from Rhode Island. The most recent data shows that in Rhode Island during the 2013-2014 school year, minority students made up 39% of the student population but received 57% of all disciplinary actions. And comparable data on children with special needs shows that same year, 2013-2014, 15% of Rhode Island students were in special education, but these students accounted for 30% of all disciplinary actions and 26% of all students disciplined. So you can see the real disparity in terms of the number of students these groups represent in the schools and the number they represent in terms of suspensions that are given. I was interviewed for an article, I think last year, and somebody sent me a question after the article came up saying, well, maybe the reason why these groups are getting suspended more is because they're more often behaving badly. So I just wanted to bring up that there's been a lot of national research shown that this is not the case. There's actually no evidence that there are more serious patterns of rule breaking in these populations. And in fact, one thing I think is worth pointing out is that there seem to be even greater disparities in terms of the way suspensions are given out for subjective offenses like disorderly conduct and disrespect than there are for ones that are objective, like carrying a weapon or drug possession. So that sort of further substantiates the issue. These are sort of decisions that are being made by the person meting out the discipline, and they're meting it out differently based on characteristics of the students. There's been some really great work done at the national level, collaborations between the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice, giving really important guidance about best practices in terms of collecting information on disproportionality and acting on it. That I think, and so that we have really good information about how to address these issues. And I just want to point out that the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, Mandatory Civil Rights Data Collection already requires that states report information on disproportionality in the way disciplinary actions are addressed by race and ethnicity. And so, in fact, for our fact book every year, we get information from the Rhode Island Department of Education, information that comes from individual school districts. So this bill would not require that any additional data collection is done by schools and districts. They're already collecting this information, reporting it to RIDE, who is in turn reporting it to the Department of Education. What it would do, though, is require that this information be reviewed on an annual basis and encourage that action be taken when these kind of disparities are identified. So that would be an improvement. Rather than just collecting that information, it's sitting at RIDE. It would be publicly available, annually reviewed, and there would be opportunities to act on that information. In terms of the second provision around out-of-school suspensions, I wanted to specifically address the issue that I think is being talked about a lot among all of you there, about concern about whether the bill passed in 2012 that said that we cannot give out-of-school suspensions when the infraction is let me see if I can find, when the sole basis for an out-of-school suspension cannot be a student's absenteeism. And we do see the data shows that that all of these suspensions that are related to attendance issues are getting in-school suspensions, but I am hearing anecdotally from youth, just like the youth that spoke earlier, that it is in fact happening. It's not being reported, so perhaps there are cases when people can say, well, there was disrespect and tardiness, where they're putting disrespect as the formal reason for suspension, but the student is perceiving it as primarily related to his or her tardiness. So I think it's something that's worth looking into. Those are the major issues that I wanted to highlight, but I just wanted to say that we think these are really important issues to get at in terms of ensuring that disciplinary practices support students, teachers, and schools, don't exacerbate racial ethnic disparities in educational opportunities, and don't push youth out of school. And thanks for the opportunity to testify.
Are there any questions for Ms. Geller? Thank you very much. Sir Randall, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So,
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you. So, this bill is important in two ways. It's because this bill This bill is partly addressing the racial disparities that have been repeatedly found, and also trying to encourage school districts to deal with these discipline issues more appropriately. And And that's important because, after all, the purpose of the school should be to help young, growing people integrate into society, to become more fully part of society. But if you suspend children when they're young and they learn that they're not accepted, they learn that they're perceived as criminal, and they learn to act that way, then that's doing the opposite. That's the opposite of what schools should be doing. And in the abstract, intellectually, everybody knows that. But in practice, it hasn't been done enough. So it's one thing that I find pretty telling is that even after it has been repeatedly documented that school districts in Rhode Island show these disparities between white children, black children, and Latino children in suspension, even as these disparities have been shown even as young as elementary school. Elementary school students are sent home for disorderly conduct at a rate much higher for students of color than for white students. But even after that has been repeatedly documented, no school district that I know of has a plan to address those disparities. And one of the things that this bill does is it requires school districts to set up that kind of plan. Now, it's been asked, what kind of alternatives do you have to out-of-school suspensions? And we've heard a lot of alternatives already. They range from in-school suspensions to restorative justice to many other alternatives. I don't think we've solved this problem completely. We don't know yet, we may not know yet everything about the best way to bring up children, the best way to deal with discipline problems, but it is good to make sure that that the teachers do not reflexively respond to problems by sending students home, because when that happens, when teachers and principals act that way, it does turn out that this is affected by bias, that students of color are going to be more affected. Most teachers and most parents know that there are times when the right response to a discipline problem is not to send somebody home, not to show that this person is being excluded from the group. Sometimes it's to do something different. Sometimes it's a different kind of consequence, like barring social activities. Sometimes the right kind of response is not to do anything punitive at all. And most teachers and parents know that there are some situations when that's the right thing to do. The problem is that because of these unconscious biases that I think the best of us have, teachers don't always know to do that as much with students of color. And one thing that this bill is doing is it's sending a message to school districts and to teachers to not resort to suspensions as the first step, and to consider alternatives. It may not solve the whole problem, but it's a good first step. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Rose? Thank you very much. Hillary Davis, Rhode Island ACLU.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. The ACLU is here in strong support of this legislation, as we have been over the past couple of years. I wanted to address a couple of questions that have come up in this hearing about the existing law and why it's not being followed. The existing law around suspensions, I'm not sure when it was written, but it hasn't been updated since, I believe, 1998. Since 1998, what we have seen is a tremendous explosion nationwide in the use of suspensions, and part of that is because of zero tolerance policies. Zero tolerance policies have led to an emphasis on suspensions, which has then eroded an understanding, I think, of the existing law, and has really changed the way that we view student discipline. And I think that's part of why we are here where we are today. In the past 17 years since the law was last amended, our understanding of suspensions has increased tremendously. In fact, earlier this year, there was a new study that came out that demonstrated that schools that suspended at higher rates had lower academic achievement for all other students in the school. Their test scores were lower. And part of what they attribute that to is a generalized sense of anxiety among the students. They don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. Lower suspending schools had higher test scores, and in fact, they were able to isolate out the suspensions as part of the reason for that, absent all other factors. The other question that has come up a bunch of times today is the law that was passed by this committee in the General Assembly a few years ago around suspending students for attendance issues. It is true that in the data there is still no attendance suspensions, but we are hearing exactly what the students in the room have told you. They're being suspended not for the attendance issue, but for the attendance issue. A student is tardy one too many times and they are being suspended. A student is given detention because they didn't show up to school, they missed detention or are late to detention, and then they get suspended. And as I'll mention in a minute, I think where those suspensions are being recorded is as disorderly conduct suspensions, which is very concerning to me. There are a lot of people in this room who are parents. When your child talks back to you, you do not kick them out of the house. That's not how it works. We redirect their behavior. We teach them what is appropriate. We teach them how to be good adults. But what happens very often in schools is that teachers who are exhausted, overworked, underpaid, not given the amount of resources, suspend students or recommend suspension for students for exactly those reasons. And the oversight has been lost over the years. We have issued 2 reports in 2 years, and in the next few weeks we'll be issuing another one about the racial disparities in school suspension rates. We will also be focusing this year on disability. I've included written testimony to you that gives you the highlights, but I think it's important to note that Rhode Island schools issued 15,561 suspensions last year to 8,163 students. That includes 1,400 elementary school students, and 145 of those were in the first grade. Those of you who've been here multiple years hear that similar number a lot, which indicates to me that it's not the first graders that are the problem. There is something else that is going on. 60% of suspensions last year were for low-risk behavioral infractions. Last year when I was here, I told you that 1/3 of suspensions were for disorderly conduct and insubordination disrespect. Last year, that number was 52%. There is no denying that what children are being pushed out of school for is low-risk behavioral infractions, talking back, being kids, having a bad day. I certainly believe that there are times in which suspensions are appropriate. Representative McLaughlin, that is the excellent example of when a suspension was probably appropriate and that child needed to be removed from the classroom for everybody's safety. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the youth who are being unfairly pushed out. There is another report in front of you that is the school to prison pipeline in black and white. This is one of the rare opportunities when the General Assembly has to solve a wide, or at least address a wide range of issues with a small bill. This bill can affect all of the issues that are included in that packet, which includes juvenile justice rates, prisons, and a variety of other things. We are here in strong support of this legislation. I certainly hope to see it pass this year, and are happy to work with anybody that we can to see that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions? A quick question.
Well, I'd just like to expound.
Chairman, a question. Okay.
With Hillary in reference to, there needs to be inclusion here. Apparently, these children are here. They're talking about abuse, in the system, but in the conversation itself, okay, there should be a conversation within the teachers, within the framework of the home, and I don't want to sound redundant. My daughter used to come home and say, something, Dad, a lot of these kids don't have a home. They don't have parents. They sleep in cars. They want to, this is in Durfee, one of the worst high schools to teach at. So there has to be a conversation, not only with the students. If you're going to put forth a law, okay, there needs to be communication with all parties involved. Thank you.
Good point, Representative McLaughlin. Collaboration, and that's why we're here today, and very pleased to hear from the students that were very concise in their analysis of what was going on and very articulate. So, and we'll collaborate with them and making these corrections. Any further questions? Mr. Parisi, thank you very much for your testimony. The last witness. Jim Parisi of the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Healthcare Professionals. Welcome. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. I'm going to have a little different take on the legislation. While I didn't sign up in support, I'm not in opposition either. Actually, the overall goal of the bill, reviewing disparities if they exist, coming up with a plan to remedy them, and then do so in a public way all make perfect sense to me. I've got a couple of specific issues. Number one, as a person who represents public school teachers and other school support staff, I'm a little bit concerned that it's just the superintendent who's reviewing the data and coming up with a plan. I think if you're going to pass legislation, you need to be more inclusive of the school community to develop what the alternatives to whatever we're doing today are going to be. I know my public school teachers care deeply about maintaining a conducive learning environment for everyone in their classroom, and if there are disparities in discipline that have to be addressed, they ought to be addressed, but we can't lose sight of the overall goal of having a learning environment that is good, not just for that chronically disruptive kid who might need something special, but everyone else as well. But the way this bill's drafted, it really just gives it to the boss, the superintendent, if you will. And while teachers aren't responsible for making suspension decisions, they often initiate the action and certainly deal with the consequences of appropriate discipline or lack of appropriate discipline, which happens as well. So that's an overall issue I have with just the structure of the bill, which I don't think goes to the core of the bill, but it just goes to the way it's put together. I do have some reservation with the second provision. While I understand the goal that you don't want to be suspending kids for absenteeism, which the Assembly's already addressed and we supported, and maybe even tardiness, I think that statutory cite, 16217A, is the definition of a disruptive student, and I read it, and I first of all came away with the conclusion, well, if a student did a one-time thing, that you can't suspend them at all. And if we're going to make sure that, there aren't, serious infractions going on, sometimes it does happen one time. It's not a persistent issue, which is what the statutory definition of a disruptive student is. So I understand the goal, but I don't think that statutory cite works, because I think it would prevent school districts from suspending someone who did a one-time, slugged another kid, and we can't suspend them because it didn't happen on a repeated basis and there hadn't been efforts to correct that action. And then the final comment, I'm just intrigued by what I heard with the students, that, you pass a law and you think something's happening, but there's ways to get around it. And just from a union perspective, I, with my own members, sometimes suffer when my own members don't know their rights. Maybe there's something the Assembly can do to ensure that all students and their parents know what the appeal rights are for disciplinary policy. That was an idea we had a long time ago when we required handbooks to go home and get signed off by the parents every year, but maybe we need to readdress that issue and make sure people are complying with it, because absolutely, if students are being unfairly disciplined, they should know their rights so that they could appeal it.
So the due process that is outlined for a suspension hearing is very clear, and I am not sure, and I know from being in the field for 37 years, it varies from school to school, and you're right that sometimes parents and students don't know that they have the right to a hearing. And I would ask our attorney to look at, in the bill, page 2, the line 17 and 18, and whether or not, with the bill, the way it was written, if that language was not there, my question would be, don't they have to comply with that statute, that law that is currently in lines 4 through 11 on the first page? And maybe that we'll look at that and discuss that, and I appreciate bringing that up, but that's a discussion. Representative Regenberg.
More just a quick comment. I'm certainly all for students knowing their rights. That's really important. Anything we can do to improve that. But I think that the idea that it's on students to sort of correct the wrong in the system, that if this is happening, that it's more students' responsibility to speak up, and like we need a system that we're all taking responsibility for that as well. Not saying that you weren't saying that, but I think that's important.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a real quick comment, just very quick.
Comment, because we've got a couple more bills.
Right, just very quick comment. Hearing the ACLU representative talk about zero tolerance, and your understanding of not just administrators, but being more inclusive in grouping, if we're going to do some type of board or whatever, I think that would be important, only because where is the zero tolerance being initiated? Is that being reinforced? Is it coming down from the administrator? Where is that coming from? So that's a concern I would have. So yeah, we want to make sure, I think everyone's involved. I would absolutely agree.
Yeah, thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Parisi. Thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 5383. The next bill we're going to hear is House Bill 5411. If Representative Palangio could come forward, Dave Raposa, and Nick, I don't know if it's Heron. And we'll give, if you could just please be seated, and we'll give the young voices a chance. Thank you, ladies. Have a nice evening.